Railroad is one of the most popular and efficient methods for shipping goods across land. Canada has rail lines from coast to coast that move goods such as oil, grain, lumber, and consumer items. Generally speaking, shipment by rail tends to be safe and much more environmentally friendly than shipment by truck. However, in the early hours of July 6, 2013, the entire community of Megantic, Quebec was struck by tragedy when a train carrying oil derailed and exploded in the center of the town, killing 47 people. The ensuing fire burned for 2 days following the blast. 2,000 people were forced from their homes due to toxic fumes and the potential for further explosions, and about 30 buildings were completely incinerated, including the town's historic library. The accident was the deadliest rail disaster since Canadian Confederation in 1867. Megantic is a small community of 6,000 people located in the eastern townships of Quebec. It is south of the St. Lawrence River, approximately 250 kilometers east of Montreal. The now defunct Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railroad ran a rail line from Montreal to Searsport, Maine, which is shown here on this map. Megantic is approximately halfway between these two terminus cities. The train carrying crude oil, driven by lone engineer Tom Harding, arrived in Nantes, Quebec at around 10:50 p.m. on July 5, 2013. Nantes is just west of Megantic, and the line between the two towns is a descending grade, so when a train is parked here, the brakes must be set. The train was to be left here in Nantes overnight, and a new engineer was to take control of the train the next morning. It's important to note that there are 3 types of brakes on a train. There's the train line, which is the main brake for the entire train while operating, the independent brake, which only affects the locomotive, and the handbrake, which is a very simple wheel-locking mechanism on each train car. The train brake in this case was left off so that the new engineer in the morning would be able to leave quickly. The lead locomotive, on the other hand, was left running with its air compressor providing a steady stream of air to the independent brake. The handbrakes on 2 train cars were set as well, but setting the handbrakes on 2 cars can't stop a 10,000-ton train. This meant that the lead locomotive was effectively holding the entire train in place. Soon after the train was parked, however, someone noticed smoke coming out of the lead locomotive, which was a problem that had been persisting throughout the entire day, due to a technical difficulty. This person called 911, and the Nantes Fire Department drove to the scene and shut off the locomotive to stop the smoke. They were unaware that doing so would cause the air compressor to stop operating. With air no longer being supplied to the independent brake, the brakes slowly lost their effectiveness and eventually could no longer hold the train in place. The train began rolling downhill and thundered towards the town of Megantic. The train reached the speed of approximately 105 kilometers per hour, arrived in downtown Megantic, and derailed as it went through a curve, which is shown right here on the map. Numerous tank cars were punctured, the fire began instantly, and it quickly spread due to the oil that had been spilled everywhere. The fire ripped through the entire center of the town, and burning oil also ended up in the lake. Emergency crews moved quickly to prevent the spread of the fire and clear undamaged tank cars away from the scene, but could not actually put the fire out until almost 2 days later. Needless to say, in addition to damage done to buildings and infrastructure, the Megantic rail disaster also created numerous environmental issues. One of the big ones was soil contamination. The oil saturated the ground so badly that many of the buildings, despite having survived the fire, were actually uninhabitable. As the disaster took place in an inhabited area, there weren't too many problems involving habitat loss for wildlife. However, the toll it took on the people of Megantic was extreme. In addition to the homes that were lost, numerous businesses also had to relocate due to the contamination. Furthermore, the crude oil contamination meant that the area was flooded with benzene, which causes cancer. This meant that emergency crews could only work in short shifts, making the cleanup even more difficult. In addition to the soil and air contamination, the Chaudière River was contaminated with oil as well. This meant that Lac Megantic and nearby towns lost their main fresh water source. The water was also contaminated with arsenic as a result of the crash, and the Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railroad, unsurprisingly, was faced with charges from the Canadian Federal Fisheries Act. Due to the toxic environment following the crash with the oil spills and the air contamination, many people had to be evacuated from their homes. This meant that not only was the physical health of the community of Lac Megantic put in danger, the mental and emotional health of the people were as well. The lone bright spot in the Lac Megantic rail disaster was perhaps the fact that the oil spilled was light crude oil rather than heavy crude oil. Light crude oil is significantly easier to clean up. The Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railroad quickly went bankrupt following the accident. They were bought out and now operate as the Central Maine and Quebec Railway. The Central Maine and Quebec Railway repaired much of the track of the former Montreal, Maine and Atlantic and now operate shipments on the same line. Although the crash happened 4 years ago, the people of Lac Megantic are still pushing for the rail line to be rerouted around the city instead of through it. So far, however, no action has been taken. Without a doubt, this accident brings about memories for the entire community of Lac Megantic each summer, as many people lost loved ones or homes. To prevent a disaster like this from ever happening again, the Transport Safety Board of Canada launched an investigation and came up with a number of recommendations on how to improve the safety of rail transport. These recommendations include ensuring that Transport Canada takes a more hands-on role when it comes to railway safety management systems. They must make sure that not only do the safety management systems exist, but that they are working and that they are effective. Recommendation 2 was that Canadian railways must put in place additional physical defenses to prevent runaways. Number 3 was emergency response assistance plans must be created when large volumes of liquid hydrocarbons like oil are shipped. Recommendation number 4 was that railway companies should conduct strategic route planning and enhance train operations for all trains carrying dangerous goods. And recommendation number 5 was for enhanced protection standards to be put in place on Class 111 tank cars, which were the kind of tank cars that were attached to the train in this disaster. Transport Canada also found that no single party was responsible for the crash. Rather, it was a culmination of numerous things gone wrong that led to that fateful night. The action taken by the Transport Canada Safety Board is exactly the solution that I would have recommended. In addition to the cleanup efforts, it's necessary to recognize the importance of ensuring that something like this never happens again. The new regulations put in place by the TSB show a commitment to preventing another disaster, in addition to cleaning up the one that happened in Lac Megantic. Personally, I would also recommend that all rail lines do away with a one-person operating crew. Engineer Tom Harding arrived in Nantes at around 11 p.m. and was probably exhausted from a long workday. Perhaps if there had been another person operating the train with him, more handbrakes on the train cars would have been set. It does seem rather inhumane to have a single person set handbrakes on 20 train cars late at night whilst off the clock, as would have been necessary to secure the train. However, with the help of a second person, perhaps the train could have been secured. Thank you for watching my video on the Lac Megantic rail disaster. This event was no doubt a tragedy that struck the entire nation of Canada, and nobody more so than the residents of Lac Megantic. With a little luck and a lot of planning, something like this, a disaster like this, will hopefully never be repeated.